Hi, everybody. This is Erica Mello and Susan Clinton, and welcome to episode number 116. And before we get really into the episode, because this is going to be a real, well, they're all good. This is going to be a good one. And we wanted just to mention our podcast membership again. So we're actually going to cap the membership very soon. So the URL to join is toughtotreat.supercast.com. And we've already recorded a fantastic interview with Jessica Schwartz on concussion and the Tough to Treat. That was actually a two-parter, right, Susan? That was amazing. I actually learned a lot, with that. It's amazing. And then we also have an Ask Us Anything where therapists put into our portal questions they want answered, actually, and we do an episode just exclusively devoted just to answering their questions. And I don't believe there's any other podcast out there that does this type of clinical mentoring that we do. So it would behoove everybody to go check that URL out. It's toughtotreat.supercast.com and join the club before we cap the membership.
Yes, and just to let everyone know, we have just dropped in part 2 of Jessica Schwartz's interview, and the new Ask Us Anything will be up Friday or Saturday, I think.
Yes.
So we look forward to seeing you there. Come join the fun. We've got some good things planned.
We do.
All right, let's move on to the episode.
Hi, everybody. This is Erica Mello and Susan Clinton, and welcome to episode 116. How are you, Susan?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. We're going to get right to it. So I wanted to talk about this particular patient and talk about the relationship of a region of the body that we talk a lot about, and because it is very important. They're all important, and how it relates to sitting. Okay, because this particular patient had an issue with sitting. So I'll briefly go into his history. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about his history, and then we're going to stop, and then we'll sort of banter back and forth on what areas of the body or what regions of the body we should prioritize before we actually get our hands on them. And then I'll talk about a little bit about what I did and how it's important to really clinically reason through someone's long history and why it relates to their problem, which is sitting in this case. So this is in the middle 40s, 40-year-old male who came to see me with left shin pain. And about 20 years ago, it started off with low back pain, and that actually got better. And he's in a sitting profession, and very sort of sedentary at work. And then it sort of progressed to shin pain. A collegiate rower, okay, which I think is relevant. Okay, a collegiate rower, where I don't know if we have any rowers in our listeners, but it's the sweeps. They do to the left. So his hands are to the left, doing a lot of rowing to the left. And also very avid downhill skier, cross country, so very active individual. But rowing is the big thing. Also works on an erg rower now, but to a much lesser extent. Okay, and past injuries. So it's his left shin, tore the left hamstring twice water skiing. Tore the left calf a few years ago. This is post dates the initial issue. There was the onset of the low back pain was insidious. Left humeral fracture, 8th grade, long time ago. And then in 2018, a tear of the right biceps, and had surgical procedure for the right biceps. And he, was saying my right arm is a bit longer, that's sort of quote unquote. And did a lot of reading of John Sarno's book as well back in the day. And after started rowing again, probably outdoors a little bit in 2019. And his low back was really stiff for 3 weeks. And
so what happened in 2019?
He was doing the rowing again. He was doing the indoor ergo row.
Okay.
And then his back got really stiff for a few weeks. Then it was okay. Ended up going on a ski trip to Europe, and the left foot went numb, and the shin went numb, and got foot drop, and that all resolved. Took a Medrol pack, all helped. And now he's sort of left with, some years later now, 3 years later, with this residual left shin pain that gets worse while sitting in the office. So I'll just repeat: hamstring tear ×2, left calf tear, left humeral fracture, excuse me, right biceps tear, right surgical repair of the biceps, 2018, history of rowing, and basically makes him feel better as walking, and also doing some stretching like of the hips and things like that. Worse in the office, sitting in a dining room chair, pretty okay. Sitting up in the office chair at home, not as good as the dining room, but better than the office. March of 17, speaking of concussion, a concussion. So he's got a lot. He's got a lot.
So 2017, he had a concussion?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
So, and he hasn't had any injuries since 2019?
No.
So
not since the trip with the foot drop in France. No, he's been.
I find this very interesting.
Yes, tell me.
So when he tore his hamstring twice, I assumed that he did not avulse it off of the ischium. Okay.
No.
Okay, because that's such a major injury.
Yeah.
Requiring surgery and the cast and the whole thing. Okay, I just find this interesting. This is somebody who's had kind of idiopathic low back pain that did progress to shin pain. It started 20 years ago with that, who knows why, but perhaps maybe the rowing was part of it. I would have to say that it was.
Yeah,
but it seems like to me there's some sort of minor power outage that occurred. Because why does he have 2 hamstring tears and a left calf tear, and then proceeds on to left foot numbness and foot drop? This is like this progressive kind of power outage that just can't keep up with the type of activity that he enjoys doing. The most interesting thing to me is you can have, I think the statistic was up to 75% of the nerve not really working before we really even can detect that something's happening. But
interesting.
I know, so you can go a long time, but you won't really know it unless you really like tax the person out, or they start showing up with like the key muscle weakness, decreased reflexes, sensory issues. But when you start getting into the sensory issues like the foot drop, the numbness and the foot drop, then you have definitely power outage. And I'm just wondering if this was kind of like this little mild progressive under the radar kind of thing happening, with the it looks to me like L5S1. But foot drop would be a little bit more than that. That'd be L4 coming in as well. Just kind of thinking about that just a little bit there. When I was hearing your history, I was kind of like trying to see what kind of pattern could come up. And also interesting, he does better in a hard chair, like one that's got good support. What does his office chair look like?
Yeah, so I ended up going to the office, and so he also mentioned that in the fall of 2019, he did a lot of yoga, which helped a lot, which I guess makes sense. He's rather tall guy. I went to the office and I took pictures, and huge office, huge. So he's got 2 computers. Why doesn't it? It's amazing. When I was working on Wall Street, I had a bunch of computers because I was a trader. Okay. Everybody has more than 1 computer now. It's crazy. So more computer screen, I should say. So 2 screens, worked more to the left. The chair, he had a couple chairs in the office. His chair was not like everybody says, oh, I have this great Herman Miller chair. I'm not a fan of those chairs, but his was adequate. We tried different ones out. And I will just tell you, since we're talking about going to the office, I did take pictures. Okay. And he was way to the left, way translated to the left in the chair. So when you see him from behind, you see his entire left scapula and his arm sticking out, whereas the right you don't. So he's made a huge translational shift to the left in the chair. I don't necessarily think that was because the computer was on the left, because he was actually using them more centered. So the chair I thought was good. So I'll just continue the office. So what I ended up doing, just in the moment, because I was there, I was like, can you just raise the left armrest? Because they were even. I said, just raise your left armrest. And he gets symptoms pretty quickly, like 10 minutes at this point, 10 minutes. And I just said, raise your left arm, which I know, just humor me. And we sat there. I walked around. I mean, nobody was around, at that. And he actually felt better. And I was like, okay, just put that in the back of my brain. He goes, maybe it's me, but I actually think that helps a lot. And I was like, okay. I mean, I had been treating him, so we can backtrack. So I want to hear your thoughts on that. But the chair was okay,
Yeah,
I thought.
it sounds like the pattern is his rowing pattern.
I think so. I agree.
He's doing it for like all those years. If he was a collegiate rower, he didn't start off in college rowing. That sounds like a dominant movement pattern that's in there.
Yeah, agreed.
And he just sits in the chair and goes right back to it.
I agree. And I agree. I mean, and once again, sitting in a dining room chair, you're really not horribly using your arms unless you're eating, but you're eating more close to the chest. Whereas the computer, he's this with the arms, he's got his arm reaching, he's picking the phone up. He's doing more longer lever arm work than he's sitting at a dining room table. So driving, I asked him, because he does drive occasionally, not as much, but he does drive, and driving also not horrible. Once again, it is his right leg, it's his left side is his sort of symptomatic side, but not as bad. Driving doesn't feel great, but it's really mostly the sitting at the office, and then driving would be second, and then maybe the office chair at home, and then the dining room chairs are fine. So I'm thinking arms. I definitely think the rowing is a major issue. He's been to many therapists, had done a lot of core strengthening, didn't really get much better. But I do believe that the rowing is huge. And I explained that to him when I first saw him. I was like, you have a dominant movement pattern. It's taking you to the left. You sweep to the left. And that's how you sit. But the reason why I wanted to talk about him as well is because I'm just going back to his medical history. I do agree that he obviously had a power outage, but it seemed to have resolved, right? He's not weak. He's not.
No, usually they don't show up as weak. It's always one of those things like you have to get them to. He needs to like probably go row for like 2 hours and then test him.
Yeah.
That's when those things would show up. They don't show up, on these kind of people who are strong people, because they can still do everything. It's when they really like bring them, and I think you said that he went back and started rowing, and he ended up with his back being tight and all these things happening.
Yeah.
Those key muscles may not test out as weak, because if he's just walking around and doing his thing, he's like fine.
I know. And I know, I said to him, I said, I think this is an endurance issue. This is not a strength problem, so much in a way. So, so just bear in mind. So for the listeners, just if you think about it, just clinically reason like we just did, right? The hamstring tears, the calf tear. He did have a right biceps. So yes, did he offload his right biceps to? Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, was it relevant? Yeah, maybe.
I would think more physiology is relevant there. Why is he tearing everything?
He's active, man. This guy's pretty active, I mean,
I know, but people can be super active and not tear muscles like that.
I know. And I've torn my hamstring twice, so I get it. So if you probably rowing, my guess is rowing, right?
Or I'm just wondering, is there something physiology in him? Like.
Yeah, I don't know. It could be. He doesn't have a relevant. I'm just sort of going through. The only thing that really helped him was the steroid, and he was on gabapentin. And it's interesting. He can do an elliptical fairly okay.
How long has he been on gabapentin?
It's as needed, so probably for some years now.
Was he on it when he had all these tears? 2018, 2017?
No, 2000, no.
Okay.
Maybe. I don't know, Susan. I don't know. I
Mhm.
don't want to. Why does that have an issue with
Well,
muscle?
I just when I'm like I said, I'm just kind of thinking, was there
Yeah,
anything physiology wise? He probably just had that power outage that was just under the surface, and then it's
yeah.
taking the gabapentin now for the pain, the
Yeah,
nerve pain.
yeah, because the foot drop resolved after the steroid, which makes sense. But I'm going to go quickly through the eval because
Mm-hmm.
I was explaining because he can do an elliptical fairly okay, and ironically, he can get on a bike.
Mm-hmm.
He can get on a bike and no problem.
Wonder if the bike centers him.
It does.
He
I
can't pull
explained
off
that
to
to
the
him.
left because if he doesn't fall
Yes,
over.
exactly. I was like, you're clipped in. I said, are you clipped in? He's like, yes. I said, you get hands are on a bike, you're clipped in. You really can't compensate or you're going to fall over. So cross country skiing, those are all upright. It's the
Mm-hmm.
sitting in the office.
Yeah.
Okay. So in my evaluation, I determined, this is what I determined. Okay. Um, and this is what why I wanted to talk about this is that this is very counterintuitive to how I would clinically reason, but I determined, so I actually had him squat. I looked at him squat because of the sitting. Okay. When he squatted, he went right to the left, like right to the left. And so what I did is he had no issues of anything in his feet, like no ankle sprain. At least he didn't. I asked, he didn't tell me. Maybe he forgot, but no major issues except the calf and the hamstring, but no foot ankle issues. Went right to the left, and my guess is because of the rowing pattern. So I ended up intervening. I briefly talk about what I did because I want to talk about the relationship of the driving region of the body to sitting. So I think it's fascinating. So from a priority list for him, his thorax was high on my priority list because his pelvis was just because of the hamstring tears. But if you think about his past movement issues, so for me, the priority list was lumbar spine, obviously, thorax because of the rowing, the right glenohumeral joint, just because of his past, because he does use his arms. And his feet. And the reason why I chose those is because I had a vague sense of, like, when he was telling me about the bike and how he feels fine on the bike. I just put the feet on the priority list because of the past of there's no past movement history there, no past injury. But it was just a gut feel. I think sometimes gut feels we have to go with sometimes
Mm-hmm.
with him. So
Well, so feet are involved in rowing.
exactly. They're also under straps,
Yeah. So it could
right?
be, yeah. So
That,
that's definitely something to investigate.
that's why I put it in. So to make a long story short, because I determined you're gonna die. That his left foot was his driver.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And he had a secondary issue in his
Okay.
thoracic spine.
So take
Because
us through the driver issue here. How did you come up with the left foot? Was
so
it because of the
base
squat or what?
so I
Let's
looked at
start.
this. Yeah. So I looked at the squat and he went way to the left. I said, okay, let me just rule the foot out immediately because it wasn't like there was a meaningful area for him. Sometimes if the area is
Mm-hmm.
meaningful, I'll go there first. But yeah, he didn't care. So I went for the foot and I just, put the foot in neutral, put the mouse in the house. I put the pyramid under the talus under the mortise and just literally picked his heel up, did some subtalar joint distraction. Then I just put the foot down, had him pick the right foot up and put it down just to even his base of support out. And I had him squat. He looked much better.
Mm-hmm.
Then I said, turn your head. I said, don't move. Turn your head to the right and turn your head to the left. And so before I had him squat, I just had him turn his head to the right, turn his head to the left just to get a baseline. And then when I intervened at the foot and I had him squat and then he came back up, I had him turn the head and that was no change, but it wasn't worse or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But what was worse or no change was his thoracic. He still had this shift to the left. It was much better. So when he squatted, he wasn't so far to the left. He was significantly better, but so I had him really exaggerate the arm lift when he squat. I said, squat and really use your arms in reach, like you're reaching for your computer or your mouse at your desk versus just a straight up and down shoulder flexion
Mm-hmm.
squat. So he squatted and then he reached and then he went way to the left with the arms.
Okay.
So what the foot didn't correct was that. It made it better, but it wasn't like 100%. All right. And so this was not an easy eval for the listeners. It was something that I had to go back and forth with. And so I went in and I did the same thing up at the thorax, in the sort of middle thorax. I went in and did a little decompression, did some distraction, gave him some support, squatted. He still went to the left. So there was no one driving region of the body that I felt was going to give me the most bang for my buck. So what I ended up doing was I went back to the foot, did my subtalar joint distraction, did some distraction at the talus, put the foot down. Then I went up into the thoracic spine and did the similar little distraction, gave him some support, prevented him from going to the left. Basically, he squatted and he was so much better. So, but I will have you. So
wait, before you go further, what did his head do? Did his neck stay with the thorax, or did it go opposite?
It stayed with the thorax.
Okay. All right.
It stayed with the thorax. So then what I did was, I'm looking at this eval. It was not an easy one to do because I was going back and forth between foot and thorax. And I had him squat again I couldn't stand there and put my hands up on his thorax when he was squatting because I wanted to feel the power. I wanted to feel his hamstrings. I wanted to look at his calf to see if there was anything that was over recruiting or under recruiting. And that looked pretty okay. But there was a big shift to the left when the arms were in front, Susan. So if I just did a squat with an arm lift, it would have been like, oh, that looks pretty okay. But he's not a painter. He doesn't, he sits and he uses his computer with his arms in more this sort of protraction. And that's when I found the deficit, not when he was just doing an arm lift. So I'm going to fast forward. Okay.
So one question before you fast forward, what did you have him stand on one leg and the other leg? Did he stand on the left leg and the right leg?
Yes.
And
he was okay on the right, not as good on the left.
Okay. Did it seem like it was balance, or did it seem like he was being pulled, or?
He was being pulled. He was not balanced.
Okay.
Yeah. He sort of shifted his thorax to the left when he did that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that brought it out, actually.
Yeah. And I did watch him walk, and walking makes him feel better, and he was okay. But the interesting thing is he had a sit to stand desk, and he said the sit to stand desk was not great. And I was like, okay, you're still using your arms. You're still using your arms, even though you're standing. But cross-country skiing is okay, because I think it's a quick movement versus a static, right? I was trying to clinically reason that in my brain, but I want to fast forward because I ended up.
Well, cross-country skiing requires him to cross midline.
Yes.
Reciprocate.
Yes.
And when he's working, he's not reciprocating.
No. But what was interesting is that when I did go to that office visit, the left, making that change to that left armrest was significant. And it just took him out of his dominant movement pattern. That's all it did. It just shifted him to the right, or centered him basically. And I explained that to him. I was like, don't overthink this. All I did was just move you a little bit more center. That's all. For the listeners, like with the hamstring tears and the calf tears, he definitely had a large in his calf. He had Susan, if you take a look, I mean, it was a significant bulge. Like there was a bulge in the left calf. The calf tear was never treated. He probably has some scarring in there, but it was just not treated. So that was like the only obvious thing that I saw. Okay. And I ended up doing a little bit of work in there just because I couldn't take, it was just so obvious. So I ended up doing that just for a little bit. So anyway, so what I've been doing is that I've been treating the foot, okay, and doing some work in the thorax, but I want to hold off on what I've done because I want your thoughts on. So I actually taped his left foot with the leukotape and the hypofix into this is the taping I learned up with LJ Lee and Diane Lee, the subtalar joint distraction taping where I pull down, and I've gotten a lot of emails from listeners on this. So and it really helps. So he goes with the tape off. He sits at the office and feels better with the tape on the foot.
The sensory input. Yeah.
That's where I want to start because I was like, and I had a funny feeling it was going to help. but I don't think that that's going to take him home, so to speak. But it made such a world of difference. Oh, and I'm thinking, and I know in my brain, my clinical brain, why, but he's going to say, well, I'm not sanding on my foot. I'm like, well, you are. You've got your foot on the ground, right, Susan? So
Mhm.
let me know your thoughts on that.
Well, if the sensory information from the tape into his skin caused him to shift his posture, because remember the sensory information has to be processed at the cerebellum.
Yeah,
And when we have processing at the cerebellum, then it gets matched up to the motor map. And when that comes in, that's going to be new information and the motor map will change
yeah,
based on that
yeah,
information. Is it
yeah.
permanent? We don't know. We do know that we can affect it in the short term. And
Right.
maybe if their movement system is nimble enough, it can start to change. It's not going to be something you want to use all the time every day, as we always talk about. But if it can mean, helping to shift something early, then I think that that's fine. But this guy, rides bikes and does well. It seems to me that probably what that did was take him out of that. I don't know what his foot looked like, but if he's a rower with his feet under straps, there's a different posture to the foot because of that, because the
Yeah.
foot's a puller, not a pusher.
Yep.
The foot is pulling the body forward rather than pushing the body over the way that, it works in standing and walking. So, that it makes for an interesting kind of observation. Did it take him out? Maybe he's consistently, as he like leans to the left and goes into that rowing posture a little bit with it in his chair and his arms out in front of him like he's rowing. I'm just wondering if maybe the foot pulls into that too.
Yep.
The movement system is the movement system, and it's a pretty
Yep.
well ingrained movement pattern that he has.
Yep.
um so did the tape, help him put his foot down onto the ground,
I think it did.
instead of it
Yeah.
laying over on the side? Because
Yeah.
I didn't see him sitting. I don't know if he was like, if his foot and ankle, if he was like weight bearing on the
I,
side of his foot while
he
he's sitting in
wasn't.
the, yeah,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. I looked at him without his shoes on, and then I looked at him with shoes on, obviously, but it didn't really affect it that much. The most glaring thing in sitting was the thoracic translation, but I did assess his foot.
Hmm.
Okay. And dad had a lot of restrictions in the rear foot. He had a ton of tone in the midfoot. I mean, I'll be specific, like an externally sucked up navicular, sucked up, midfoot. And he had a hard time getting the foot back on the ground. Okay.
So that was his over recruitment. It wasn't the
Right.
hamstring or the calf, it was down into the foot, the
Right.
intrinsics. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and I gave him a ball to roll on and a weight and all of that, and I actually gave
Mhm.
him some stuff for his calf. Like I had him go into kneeling. I put a ball in the popliteal fossa a little bit. I had him kneel back on that. That helped. So I gave him some self release to do. But I wanted to talk about, because I was explaining to him the whole issue with the sitting is the whole neural input in your movement, but
Mhm.
it doesn't address your arms. And it may be that it gives you a little bit more longevity in sitting, but it's not going to address like an hour or 2 hours down the road. Okay. Because you'll move your feet, you'll move your body. I did get him on the Pilates reformer away from the bar and had him take the straps into a rowing position.
Mhm.
And most rowers, at least from what I've experienced, they tend to brace their scapula a lot. They've got that pattern that it's called a scap bracing. So I gave him a lot of, it sounds counterintuitive, but I gave him, we call them like wall lands or wall push-ups almost, because he needs to be able to disassociate that scapula from the thorax. And I gave him like imagery with floating your scapula. Imagine you've got balloons in your armpits, things like that. Because when he sat on the on the reformer with the straps in his hand, he sat completely upright, and he looked pretty okay, but it wasn't the rowing motion. It was just a straight, plain, retraction, protraction, retraction. But when he went into that, when the carriage came the other way and he had to sort of sit back, he did go into that left translation when his arms were in protraction. And I think that was his
Mhm.
buckle point. He's not a lefty. He is a
Mhm.
righty, but I do think with sitting, it just falls into that pattern. So I'm going to go forward a little bit. Give me 1 second. I'm just looking through my notes. So I put him through at the beginning a foot program. Okay. A like a easy We went into sling squats, like knees, heel raises with knees bent and knees straight. I had him go on the wall, and I actually had him do wall squats, hands on the wall with the sense of center. I put a line down the wall, and I said, your bias is to your left. And he corrected that pretty quickly. So I gave him wall squats, and I gave him those sling squats to start with. And slowly, the sitting got better, but then it sort of plateaued. Okay. And it was just the same sort of thing, sitting in the office, nowhere else. And I said, what has helped you to date? He's like, the tape and lifting the chair, the arm rest. So he's doing well, but you're at the point where the endurance issue. So I can go through his exercise program, but I gave him some, a typical arm, I call it arm series, supine, skull crushers, triceps, elbow lifts with weight. He was doing 10-pound weights at that point. He was doing pretty okay. And I was like, it's not a strength issue with you. It's not an endurance, it's an endurance issue, right? And so how do you, so he can do wall lands, he can do wall push-ups, he can go and do a down dog, he can do split squats. I started him on deep squats, going side to side, with the TheraBand wrapped around the forearms to get that control, going side to side, giving star lunges. So back and, trying to get him out of neutral. But there comes a point where you have, I think this is what I'm thinking, and would love your thoughts, where it's not so much, it is his movement pattern, but he's much better with that.
Mm-hmm.
Is it if it's an endurance issue with the sitting, I don't think it's the chair. I'm pretty convinced. I've done a lot of ergonomic assessments over my career. I think the chair is pretty good. I mean, I could certainly recommend another one, but I didn't think it was horrible. There comes a point where when you start to address the endurance, you need to change that exercise program. He needs to do like 50, 60, 70 reps of something before, or like you say, have him row for 2 hours, which is not going to be really possible right now. And get him into a position. Because usually but the issue is he, after 5 or 10 minutes of sitting, I mean, now it's better, but didn't take long. It was pretty irritable. It didn't take long.
So how long can he sit now before it comes on?
Probably gets up every hour. So that's probably an hour. Like he just gets up anyway. But he still gets it if he has to sit. So he had like an office meeting, sits for 2 hours. He's really feeling it. And so I'm pretty convinced that the drivers are still the same.
So yeah, and I feel like that the other piece of this is probably more the neuroimmune response.
Yeah.
So the only way to, the one really good way to tackle that is to not let it go that far. He just he's going to have to get up at 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Not at the hour, not when he hurts, but before.
Yeah.
And do something meaningful.
Yeah.
So that may be like the doorknob squat or the wall squat, or not just walk around. Walking around is great, don't get me wrong, but doing a few meaningful things with the walking around to reset, absolutely, because that's his trigger. And even in an office meeting, he may just have to stand up, and move around, and it's okay. Just sometimes they need permission, to be able to do that. And if he has a reason why, because if you can begin to get that neuroimmune response to stop becoming that deep, icky pain, you have to kind of stop it before it gets there. Because otherwise it just keeps triggering, and it's longer now, which is great. And the stuff is working and it's changed him, but he may have to really have that, really get that meaningful time and start really being consistent with it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think because the issue is with because the foot helped him so much,
Yeah.
and the thoracic stuff, but I was like, this is an endurance issue, or as I told him, you need to do the wall squats. He has a TheraBand in the office. There's something in the back of my brain though, because given his history, I almost want to get him in a really wound up, loaded position because I sat there I was in
Mhm,
that office, and after this is early on, after 10 minutes, it was there and he wasn't doing it. He's just sitting there typing. It's
mhm.
not like he was rowing but he was in this sort of non-optimally, left translated position in the chair. And then I just literally had him lift. That's when I had him move his armrest up to get him centered, and that helped. But over a while, after a while, even with that left arm up, the
Mhm.
armrest, he still is
Mhm.
going to fall back into that pattern. I
Yeah.
mean, right? So that is the issue. And the reason why I wanted to talk about him was because the footwork helps so much in the sitting position. Okay, so
Yeah.
for the listeners, that's yeah.
The other thing that you might can try is have him, I know he's got his things centered, have him shift his screens to the right.
Mm.
Vision is such a
All the way
powerful
over.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
shift it over to the
yeah,
right. It doesn't have to go all the way over, but just enough
yeah,
to
yeah,
make
yeah.
him weight shift and change and just
Yeah, that's a
see,
good idea.
why not? And that could be
Yeah,
something he could do. Like you can start off with them in the center. You get up at 45, you shift your screens to the right, you move around and you sit down and you work with it this way. And
right.
start giving him variance within his office work so that he has to shift and move when he's in the middle of thinking and not paying attention to his body.
Yeah, 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 exactly. That's a
Yeah,
good
so
idea.
those might be some things that you can work on is you're giving him the variance in his body. Now he needs the variance in his what am I
His
trying to
movement
say?
patterning and his daily activities, his
Well,
movement.
in his structure, like the
Ah, ah,
environment, his environment needs variance.
yeah, 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 yeah. Got it. Yeah,
So
yeah,
walking feels good because you're not only are you moving and reciprocating, but you're also in different environments. So you're adapting to the
yeah,
environments as you're
yeah,
walking around, right? And when
yeah.
you're sitting
Okay,
in your
yeah,
office and everything stays the same, you can move your body as much as you want to, but there's not enough variance in the office to, drive that for him. And when you get in the
right.
middle of having to do, thinking and working, we tend to just fall into the dominant motor pattern because our brain is like busy doing something else.
Yeah,
And so if you do that, that might help, because you can, we have good stuff on this. If you change, one of the best ways to change walking is to change their shoes, because it changes the environment in which they're walking in.
yeah,
The
yeah,
other, so the best thing to do to change, posture is to change the environment.
yeah, yeah,
People will
yeah.
slump down if the computer screen's too low. They'll set up ramrod straight if it's too high. But for him, since he always tends to fall into this one posture, if he can just start manipulating his environment, that's going to force his motor system to adapt. It's not going to be able
Yes,
to stay in that
yes,
other way because it won't work. He can't see, he won't be able to do it. So he'll have to do something to make that happen. And then you guys can play
yes.
around with it. Like, how does this feel? What if we put it here? What if we put it here?
Yeah, but exactly. It's interesting because if you think about the things that make him feel good, elliptical,
Yeah.
bilateral arms,
Uh-huh.
bike, all clipped in,
Right.
and
Cross
cross
country
country
skiing.
skiing.
Mm-hmm.
It's all straight in there, right? And it doesn't he can't really sort of cheat, so to speak,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So yeah, that's great because the reason why I wanted to mention him was the foot,
Mm-hmm.
but also about this contextual thing because it is extremely very 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 specific to the office, and
Yeah.
people are going to say, oh, the chair, I've done it all. I mean, I've done them. The chair
Yeah,
is
I
good.
would I would just start manipulating the office. Like, where is the desk located? Can you move
Manipulate the
it so that
environment.
as people walk by, he has to look over a different way? Can he, there's just so much you can do, changing
Yes.
pictures, moving things around, but the computer screen being more, just taking them and
Yeah.
just sliding them over,
Right. Right. And
and
exactly.
creating variability. We don't want to get him stuck in another way either. We want him to kind of learn how to manipulate his environment so that he's got.
Right. And he's so used to being in an environment with sports that is reciprocal and
Yeah.
bilateral
Yeah.
now versus rowing, he was not.
Right.
But and that's why I got him to do that. We're doing deep squats side to side. I'm getting him out of neutral and
Yeah.
getting him into the frontal and transverse plane because that's what's gonna. And I'm incorporating the foot and the thorax, obviously, with that. But that's, I think, will help train but I do like the manipulating the environment. That's
Mhm.
a great, we have to figure out how we can make a really quick thing. Manipulate the environment. Change the context, right? We talk
Yeah.
about that so often, right?
Yeah.
He has to work in the office. You can't change that. That's the
Yeah.
way it
No, then,
goes,
then there's no reason to, but that there's the pieces in the office that can change
Yeah,
and
exactly.
become more
Totally.
variable. And, I will say this out there too for clinicians, one of the things when I come to mentor people, before I even, would walk into their office, I would call them and tell them, be sure that your table is away from the wall
Mm,
because you need to start working from both sides of the table. We don't have creativity if we do one thing the same way over and over.
so true.
So it opens it up. And for as clinicians, same thing. Erica's table in her place where she practices is right in the middle of the room. She's all around it
Yeah, yes, yeah.
and moves it quite a bit, so that she
Hmm.
can do the things that she needs to do. And I think we all get stuck into ruts. And this is a clear example of, he's done a really great job of keeping himself going, but that office, just that position and probably the work has become a little less, creative. And so sometimes when we start switching things up or we, get up and move a little bit and do things a little differently and, we can open up the creativity side and, he might need to even do some deep breathing and, pictures, put a different picture up that makes him a little happier.
Yeah,
Like, when is
yeah,
the last time you changed out your family pictures?
yeah. I know.
They're like
It's
the same ones you've been looking at for 20 years, and they don't look like that anymore.
it's true. It's true.
Where when was the last time you freshened up those or brought in some books that were more colorful that you really do enjoy, and you just have these in your office because that's where they've always been. So
I
sometimes
know.
those kinds of things can make a huge difference, though. Is like, whenever you kind of move furniture in a room, it's always like, oh, this is great. Why did I wait so long to do this?
I know. And we always talk about, it's true. A healthy system needs choices. It doesn't
Yeah,
matter, you may not take that choice, but you need to be able to have those
right,
choices,
right.
right? And
So it needs to be able to figure out, how am I going to do this? Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And I think that this, and because of this lumbar spine, it's just an old issue. Lumbar spine is not like the driver, at this point,
hmm,
so for the listeners, that I did assess that, but I really wanted to talk about, get into the treatment and the office work, because I think that's really
yeah. It sounds
important.
like the
So
lumbar spine was more just the innocent victim,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
from the foot
exactly.
and thorax and that position and the rowing.
Stuck in the middle. Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. Awesome. Well, this was great. Thank you, Susan, as always.
Awesome. Thank you for this story and sharing your experience with us. So everybody, thank you for your attention and for listening and for all the comments that we keep getting. And we appreciate you so much. We would love it if you would go in and leave reviews for us on iTunes. It
Yes.
helps others find us.
Mhm.
Um, and please join our subscription, our podcast club at toughtotreat.supercast.com. We look forward to seeing you in there as well. Thank you.
Bye.